Okay, so in this video I'd like us to go ahead, get our clavicle bone in place and set up our shoulder position control as well. So let's jump over to the whiteboard. And if you recall back from when we overviewed the arm rig, we said we're going to have FK controls and we'd have IK controls, and all of that functionality has now been implemented. But we do still need to come in, set up a clavicle bone, and set up our shoulder position control. So what we can do, if we create a bone, a single bone for the clavicle, and we apply stretchy IK to that, we could then have that bone be a stretchy IK influence bone. We have our end effector, that could become our shoulder position control. It will always pivot from the correct location for the clavicle, but now we have control over positioning our shoulder. If we link that into the lockable stretchiness of our arm, such that when we lock the stretchy on our arm, we lock the stretchy on our clavicle as well. When we unlock the stretchy on our arm, we unlock the stretchiness on our clavicle. That would enable us to go in and have the whole arm as a whole be stretchy or not stretchy. When it's not stretchy, the shoulder position control will act more like a shoulder aim control than a complete position control, since this bone will no longer be allowed to change in length. Now, instead of simply parenting our arm underneath the clavicle bone in a way that would mean it would inherit both position and orientation, I want to only inherit position. That's because if we move our shoulder position control, say up to around this position, that would cause our clavicle rather, to aim up in that position. If our arm was to rotate about that point as well, the arm would now be pointing up in the air. I want, when the shoulder position control is moved round to here, for the clavicle to point up here, but for the arm to maintain its initial orientation. So we're actually only going to inherit the end position of the clavicle bone and not the orientation of the clavicle bone. So with that in mind, let's jump back over into Houdini. Let's create our clavicle bone and set up stretchy IK on the clavicle bone. So I'm going to jump into a front view with space 3. Then want to go ahead and activate the bones tool. I have got my chain name set to L. And I want to start the clavicle bone from the position where the geometry clavicle bone pivots and joins, intersects the rib cage. So I'm going to start the clavicle bone right around here. And I do want to point snap the end of this bone to the start of my upper arm. To do that, I'm going to hide out our skeleton geometry. Then zoom on in and turn on point snapping with V. Point snap to the end of our upper arm. Turn off point snapping and enter to accept that. We can go ahead and rename these guys. So I'm going to name this to L underscore clavicle root and L underscore clavicle. Whilst we're here, let's turn off selectability of both of these, turn off visibility of the root, and give our clavicle bone a medium orangey yellow sort of node color. If we jump over into the perspective view, we can see we do need to reposition the start of our bone chain. If I turn on the visibility of our geometry, we can see that we do need to reposition the start of the bone chain. So I'm going to activate the bones tool again. Let's turn on selectability of both of these guys again, just so we can use the bones tool on them. And I want to grab the root of our bone chain and reposition that out to where the clavicle bone intersects the rib cage. And with that in place, we can now deactivate the bones tool, turn off selectability and visibility on those guys, leaving obviously visibility on the bone itself. So now we've got that bone in place, we need to go ahead, get stretchy IK applied to the bone. So I'm going to jump over to our character rigging tab, activate the stretchy IK tool, and select a start bone. That's going to be our clavicle, enter. The clavicle will also be our end bone, so enter to accept that. That will apply stretchy IK. And we can see we got our IK handle that's come in, and that's going to be our shoulder position control. So now, if we ignore the fact that we haven't got the arm hooked up to this just yet, we can see that now we have the ability to position our shoulder. Currently it's stretchy, but we are going to lock the stretchiness in a second. So let's go ahead, clean up our network, and also rename some of these. So I want to rename this to be our L underscore shoulder position control as opposed to the IK handle. Then I want to jump down inside our chop network, and the newly created IK solver, I'm going to move up above our arm kinematics. I'm going to rename this to L underscore clavicle kinematics. I'm also going to grab all of the newly created nodes at the object level and move those up to around where our arm is in the network. So right around here will work fantastically for us. Brilliant. So now that we've got that, we can go ahead and link our stretchiness of the clavicle bone into the arm's stretchy lock. Before we do that, let's set up our control object so that it has a blue wireframe color, and also boost its geoscale up slightly as well. That's much nicer. Fantastic. So let's go ahead, jump onto our clavicle bone, onto the bone tab. Let's bring up the expression for the bone length. And I want to link this into that lock parameter that exists on our arm FK/IK controls for the left arm. So if you recall, we've got our eye length. Obviously I want to multiply that by a value of 1 when we are locked, and a value of our stretch ratio, which is currently being multiplied by when we're not locked. That means I need to do 1 minus our lock parameter plus our lock parameter times stretch ratio. So it's that linear interpolation coming into play again and again and again. It's a very, very useful technique for blending things. So we're going to use 1 minus our L_arm FK/IK controls, and that's the lock parameter on there that we want. Let's just make sure that did take. Indeed it did. And I want to add that to that lock parameter. So arm FK/IK controls lock multiplied by our stretch ratio. All of that, so the whole result of that linear interpolation multiplied by our initial length, if we accept that. So currently, if we were to grab our L_arm FK/IK controls, you can see we're set to be stretchy. So if we grab our shoulder position control, you'll notice, actually we must have messed something up on there. Yes, we put a space in the expression since our bone lost its length. Let's clean that back up. Fantastic. So you can see our bone is currently stretchy. If we then jump over and lock the arm stretchiness, our bone is no longer stretchy. It simply aims at that shoulder position control but isn't stretching to reach the shoulder position control, which is the exact behavior that we want for that particular bone. So now that we've got that in place, we need to link our arm so that our arm is attached to the end, again only inheriting position and not inheriting orientation. To do that, I'm going to wire a null off of the end of the clavicle bone, and I will reposition that null down to the end of the bone. So I'm going to copy the bone length for our clavicle, and let's translate in Z, paste copied relative references. Obviously we want a negative of that bone length, so that will move us down to the end of the clavicle bone. And let's rename this null to L_shoulder position. We can turn off visibility and selectability for that null, and then I'm going to create an unwired null over here by our shoulder root, and I'll name this to L_grab shoulder position, or even we'll go with L_position at shoulder. So now that we have that null in place, we can go ahead and reference the position of our L_shoulder position null, and that will give us the position that we can then parent our shoulder root to. So I'm going to translate this using an origin expression, and we're relative currently to the world, so we'll use a empty quote. Who do we want to grab? We want to grab that L_shoulder position, and I'm interested in translate X currently. Double click Control C to copy that, double click Control V to paste that into translate Y, changing out the component that we're interested in to translate Y, and then the same for Z. So now that we're referencing that position, we can go ahead, get our shoulder root, making sure that we keep position when parenting. We can parent that in to our position at shoulder. Notice nothing in the view moves if we turn off visibility and selectability. But now if we grab our shoulder position control and start repositioning that, you'll see that we're not affecting the orientation of our arm, we're only affecting the position. Now you may ask yourself why the twist control looked like it was going crazy. You have to recall that our IK handle for the arm isn't going to be moving. That's not attached to the arm itself, and this is the exact behavior that we want. So the twist control, of course, is going to be aiming down that axis in the center of the axis that goes from the start to the IK handle. Thus that's going to sit down here as opposed to sitting up with the rest of the arm, but that is behaving as we'd like. Let's go ahead and then show what happens if we lock the stretchiness on our arm. So if we bring arm stretchiness down to 0 so that it's locked, You can now see that this is acting to reposition the arm, but our clavicle bone is no longer stretching. And of course we can bring the arm up, and then we could shrug shoulders forwards and backwards as well if we wanted. So that's working fantastically, and is actually going to conclude the shoulder setup. I do want to turn stretchiness back on for the arm, but with that will conclude this video. Thanks a lot, everyone.